And now next to the next panel. The next panel is about, what do we have? Web3 tooling and networking for decentralized AI. And here we go. I would assume that the people for this panel are online. If somebody can give me a sign if they are ready to go. I would like to then introduce. Here we go. I see some faces. I see one, I see two, I see three. Perfect. The party can begin. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining from literally all over the world at this point. So let me start with welcoming Prasanna Venkatesh Jayaprakash. He is the innovation head at HCL, and he is also one of the founding members of the Wow DAO.
Hi.
I would have loved to actually invite him here on stage with me in person. Unfortunately, that's not the case, but he is calling in, as I remember correctly, from Dubai. So literally just around the globe. So with that, I would like to give it over to Prasanna, and here are absolutely some Web3 experts that I personally also enjoyed having met over the last few months and looking into their enterprises, into their organizations and technology platforms to figure out how we within the Wow DAO can actually team up with them and partner and build this all together. So Prasanna, please go ahead. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Thomas. And let me just start by introducing. So I've been in the technology industry for the last 2+ decades. And if I take a look at what happened in the last 2 decades, there are a huge number of scientific advancements that we have visually experienced during the COVID time, and how the medical research has basically transformed the way the vaccines are identified at a record pace. And in the last 2 decades, the kind of innovations that has happened in the AI ecosystem, especially driven by the programming and the development community, I'm sure all of us, appreciate that. And if you look at these two, were core of driving the whole world towards the next stage in the last 2 decades, I would say. And the new release of large language models like the ChatGPTs have raised a lot of questions in terms of the privacy concerns. Even in the recent today's morning session, where Dr. Mikhail was talking about the end of privacy, where if you take the buzzword of the last 2 decades, the scientists and the programmers and the developer community, and how the privacy is basically, is addressed here. And effectively, I could not expect a better panel, better than the panel that we are having here, who are exactly addressing the scientific community and also the developer community, and how to address the privacy part of it. We are fortunate to have the pioneers of these 3 segments as part of our panel. So I would love to welcome our panel here, Mr. Joshua from DCI World, and Mitja from Bosch, and John from Nevermind. Welcome you all to the panel team.
Thanks for having us.
Sure.
Thanks.
And we understand that you guys are all rock stars in the Web3 world, and part of our today's conference, so we have many of the AI team. We're newly joined, and we're part of this summit. And we would like to understand your background and also what area that you are currently working on. And to end with, if you can just also talk about what are you passionate about. So with no specific order, I would like to pass on and request probably to start with Joshua, where I'm seeing you on the screen. So over to you, Joshua. Stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prasanna. And thank you guys for inviting us to be on this panel. This is great. So my name is Joshua. I'm the founder of DeSci World. And DeSci World is an online platform, a Web3 platform to help onboard and inform and empower the decentralized science community. So we have a suite of products and a range of services, including online products, Web3 native tools. We have conference circuits, we do consultation, we do community work, we do things like this in order to try and empower the DeSci space, in particular the D-scientists who are using Web3 infrastructure in order to empower their research and empower their science. So DeSci.world is our website. Please go check it out. There's a range of useful tools there. I'm really looking forward to talking a little bit more about AI in the context of Web3 and decentralization in particular. And I'm going to go ahead and say that that is my passion for this call, and for all intents and purposes is decentralization, but true decentralization, decentralization that actually gives power to the individuals rather than to the capital providers more than anything.
Thank you, Joshua. Probably over to Mitya, please.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Mitya. I'm a co-founder of Gosh. And Gosh is the on-chain Git platform. It's basically decentralized Git where people can, work like, and it's completely standard, like work with the Git and store everything on chain, process everything on chain, including the diffs, as processes, a special virtual machine instruction, and we store everything on chain. And well, our passion is decentralization, obviously. It's kind of a given. So yesterday we announced that we will be layer 2 on Ethereum, and we launched with 12 partners that with this layer 2 product. And well, one of the things that we concentrate on is DeSci, decentralized science. It's really something that we're very passionate about. We think it's an absolutely great advancement. It's something that will allow scientists to own their work, to own everything they do, and maybe to advance some things in science that right now are kind of not advanced enough with the political agenda, large institutions or whatnot. That includes also the funding. And we believe that DeSci will enable more broader communities to join the process, which is also great. So I guess that's what I'm passionate about.
Awesome. So Don, please over to you.
Thanks, Prasanna. Hey everyone, I'm Don Gosson. I'm co-founder of Nevermind. I'm a subject matter expert in data and analytics. Spent the better part of a decade and a half in IT consulting, building data estates for some of the biggest companies on the planet. And then parlayed that in 2017 into a career in Web3. Co-founded a project called Ocean Protocol and have been doing a bunch of other things in the space, and more recently working on Nevermind. So Nevermind's at the intersection of data, AI, and Web3. We are hyper-focused on fine-grained attribution through analytical or AI pipelines. The way that manifests at the moment is we're able to track and trace data sets and models through AI pipelines, and then enforce proper attribution and the corresponding control mechanisms, in particular around the commercialization of those assets when they're monetized. So that's what we're working on. I mean, I'm super passionate about data broadly, but more specifically about attribution and consent. And I've been chasing this dragon for the better part of 20 years.
Awesome. Very nice to hear from all of you. So specific to today's topic on how Web3 and tooling and networking for a decentralized AI, I would like to start off with what is decentralized decentralization mean in the context of an AI? So probably I would like to start with Joshua, probably.
What does decentralization mean in the context of AI? Yes, just to clarify.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think you could probably get a few different responses from different people, and I would actually be interested to see if Mitra or Don had a different response to this. But for me, primarily, there's two aspects to decentralizing AI. There is decentralizing the model, which is used to train the way that the AI reacts to the data, and then there's decentralizing the data itself. So decentralizing the way that the data is contributed and the way that the data is stored and accessed. So there's sort of multiple aspects to this, which decentralization plays a part in all of them. I'm going to hone in, I think, on the decentralization of the data, because I think that that's probably the most important way to stop, I guess, a all-powerful AI model or all-powerful AI sort of infrastructure, such as, for example, OpenAI, which has databases which are largely proprietary or largely centralized databases. You have the model, which is being informed by the databases, right? But what's happening here is you're having a very specific set of data sets or a very specific narrative of data sets being fed into the AI, and that's training the models. One thing that we're really passionate about at DeSci World is giving access to people giving access to the tools to allow people to utilize their own data sets with their own narrative infrastructure, with their own, so for example, writing their own notes around specific topics with a specific tone or a specific focus, taking these data sets and using them to train AI models themselves. The decentralization of this data does a couple of things. Firstly, it allows you to understand the provenance of who contributes to the AI models. This can be useful for later on if the AI model becomes valuable, retroactively rewarding those that contribute to the power of the AI model itself, but also for, again, changing the way that this AI model actually understands questions and responds to questions. Because as we sort of roll out with ChatGPT as the primary AI model that people utilize, this is going to basically direct the consciousness, the research infrastructure, the way that people sort of just assume that AI is ChatGPT. That's actually a huge issue for us. We think that there needs to be a large amount of different providers of data, a large amount of different providers of models, a lot of different access points that will allow you to utilize AI, the power of AI, but without it being a sort of like a singular narrative, a singular brain within that AI. So for us, there's many different aspects of decentralization within AI. And I think the most powerful one or the most impactful one for the meantime is decentralizing the contribution of data sets.
Awesome. Probably I would like to understand the feedback from Mitra and Don as well. So whoever wants to go next.
Yeah, I agree with Josh completely. I maybe just to add that decentralization is almost like philosophical topic. Decentralization is probably the lack of a single point of control. I think that's like probably the most accurate. So when we talk about centralization, is like ChatGPT is completely centralized, where everything is under control of ChatGPT, even though the pieces of data they use, they don't belong to them, right? So they train the data on the data that does not belong to them. So in terms of decentralization, I think, and what Joshua said is like about the data sets, we have the data sets which are not centralized, and then we have models and training loops which are sometimes centralized, and of course we have those that are not centralized, or at least open source. Open source is good step forward, but it's not decentralization, because open source is still not, someone is still in control, despite the fact that it's less of a control, I would say. Right? But we want a complete decentralization, and I think that actually, if you think about the security problems that AI may create, right? Some will try to say that centralization is the way to go. Is actually extreme centralization with extreme control is the way to go. We actually think opposite to that. We think that it's actually extreme decentralization is the way to go, and to preserving the security. And we see that, like blockchains. Okay, let's say just a simple example of Bitcoin, right? And which is the example of money. it's completely open. It's open source, but it's also decentralized because no one controls it. But it's actually store that value very, very securely. Correct. So if we take that, that's probably the example of decentralization in the financial kind of aspect. Can we take that to the decentralization of science, decentralization of data, decentralization of code, decentralization of AI? That's the question.
Awesome. So, Don, please, your thoughts.
So I think there's, generally speaking, and this is primarily because this is pretty emergent, there's confusion around decentralization versus federation. So decentralized data in the purest sense means replicated data sets, censorship resistance, et cetera, when in reality, most of the time when we're talking about decentralized data or models for AI, we're actually talking about federated data sets and models. So it's one nuance to point out. I think it helps when you start discussing these things because it makes it easier to communicate the overall concept. So from our point of view, I think you have to look at kind of two things. There's the training of the models, and then there's the application of the models. So arguably, you could say that the data sets that are currently being used to train these models are highly federated or decentralized. It's being scraped from the internet, right? And then they're being consolidated into singular models through the creation of vectors and the corresponding weights that are contained in the latent space of the model. The issue there isn't decentralization. The issue here is, at least in the context of data, the issue here is consent and the entire lack thereof. And so how do you actually, to Mitya's point, control this in a decentralized capacity? Well, the consent, I think, needs to be decentralized. So you really have to look at the governance frameworks that control the access to those inputs, perhaps the retraction of any sort of consent that's provided initially for training purposes, or how you manage the overall consent of the usage of these federated or decentralized data sets. And then the next piece, and it's especially relevant now at the moment, because because of the expense or the cost burden and the barriers to entry to actually creating these models, the response is to do either fine-tuning or retrieval augmented generation. And this is where context becomes massively applicable. And so that context is also federated and decentralized. So you have to look at, in particular, in the science arena, research, healthcare, biopharma, the context is massively distributed when you look at the data sets. And so it becomes a question of how do you actually access these assets, and how do you federate the analytical process in order to capture the latent value that's in the model plus the latent value that's in these data sets. And so coming up with both the overarching governance that helps you control all of this, as well as the technology, at least from a foundational point of view, to put all this together. I mean, that's mission critical. And this is the stuff that we've been working on in this space, in particular, for the last 15 years. And so I think now we've gotten to a point of maturation on the Web3 side, plus the deployment of models, that I think are easy enough to use, broadly speaking, from an engineering development point of view, and more importantly, have kind of caught the zeitgeist of everybody, like of the general population. So these two things, we now have demand and we have the technology base to bring all of this together, so we can really start to manifest change in the direction of moving away from predatory, the predatory system that exists around everything that is Web 2.
Awesome. So I want to take this conversation down. You mentioned specifically about how the federated ecosystem is required. If I look at a Web3 development, so the majority of the things in the Web3 are driven by basically first on a smart contract based implementation, and the second is in terms of decentralized marketplace. Okay, I want to understand, take the federated operation that you are talking about in terms of what role do you think that the smart contract and the decentralized marketplace play in terms of the development and the deployment of this AI services within this Web3 ecosystem. Probably if you can just take that conversation to the next level of technical detail, that would be helpful.
Sure. And apologies for the echo. You can't see it, but I'm in a big empty space. So what, with respect to smart contracts, I think what they enable is the ability to establish, in particular, and really, okay, let me take a step back. Blockchains in particular, what they provide through smart contract technology is the ability to establish high fidelity provenance, which then you can extrapolate to fine-grained attribution. And from that, you can manifest numerous different permutations and conditions for controlling access or eliciting consent for usage of assets. So that's the power of the technology, kind of at a high level. Now, how that manifests, you can do that a number of different ways. We're obviously biased. We have a marketplace. We're going this way because of the dynamics of these types of ecosystems. They're highly dynamic ecosystems. They're incredibly complex and have numerous different capabilities, requirements on expertise. Obviously, the infrastructure and the assets are just highly distributed, et cetera. So putting all of these assets together becomes incredibly complex when you're looking at doing it in a decentralized or federated capacity. So you need to bring together multiple facets, multiple actors and stakeholders in order to make these solutions work, broadly speaking, and do it in a relatively economical way, as opposed to consolidating the wealth in singular entities and spending hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to put these systems together. So you look at the benefit of kind of the alternative to being a retailer, being a marketplace, and bringing together all of the different actors as a marketplace, as opposed to having to have all of the numerous diverse sets of capabilities required to put these capabilities together under one roof. A marketplace is just a much more effective mechanism for doing that. So that's the two drivers here. The technology side allows for fine-grained attribution, which is the requirement for both access control and manifesting consent, and then the ability to bring together multiple stakeholders, vested interests. And I'm not just talking about humans or companies, right? This is equally applicable to AI. So if we want to look out at the time horizon and what this means for how systems are evolving, what we say internally, AIs won't have bank accounts, but they are going to need the means to transact. What will they have? They'll have wallets on chain. Those are, they'll be they'll manifest through smart contracts, and they will work through marketplaces because those are the most efficient means of transacting.
Awesome. Awesome. I would like to, take the same question to Joshua as well to understand from DeSci World perspective, because there are many, medical research specific items that he is working on along with the various researchers. So, Joshua, the question is, what role does the smart contract and the decentralized marketplace play in terms of development and the deployment of the AI services within the Web3 ecosystem? Over to you.
Yeah, so I mean, apart from the sort of obvious ones of access to the AI models or access to the data itself, the open sourcing of the data or the open sourcing of the access to the models or how the models are created, there's one thing that actually is, in my opinion, the most powerful aspect of the decentralization of the intersection of AI and Web3 in particular. And this is so that, as Dom was mentioning, the context is the sort of the diamond here, the gem that's most important here is the context that informs the models, or the context that is drawn from the data itself being the context. If you are decentralizing this entire infrastructure of creating data sets, cleaning them up, turning them into usable data sets, and using them to inform models, these data sets can be drawn from all sources, from many people around the world doing their own research, for example, and contributing that research to a database, which is then used to train AI models. This process, typically in a proprietary sense with OpenAI, for example, these contexts will be taken from the internet. Yes, they're decentralized and federated in the way they're distributed, but it's essentially capturing the value of the data that is someone else's, the origins elsewhere. In this sort of new paradigm where Web3 can be directly integrated with these concepts, those that provide the data can actually be incentivized or remunerated for providing that data retroactively. Because the way that these models are processing data is essentially the vectors or the embeddings or the hyperlinks that flow through the whole thing. If you have all of this, if for example, when you contribute to a data set, you have your wallet login, your wallet account as your sort of stamp. So you have timestamping, you have versioning, you have your wallet address attached to the data that you provide to the context group, for example. This creates this trail of provenance, this trail of reference through the context of the AI that the AI is using in order to produce an answer. And when the AI then produces an answer, you can actually follow the trail of provenance through there and see what research or what contributions actually gave the context for this AI to produce this answer. And as the AI becomes more useful and people maybe pay for the service of accessing the AI or pay for the service of whatever the AI outputs, if there's any some resources or papers that are written by the AI, these can actually be retroactively used. This funds can be used to retroactively reward those that contributed to the context group. And this is something that's really, really powerful, is if you just do your research and you're active online, you're producing data all the time, and an AI model will then take that data and utilize it and produce an answer that is valuable, you could actually be retroactively rewarded for your knowledge creation, for your contributions to this context group. And this is something that the blockchain, in particular, Ethereum, for example, because there's a standardization of the ERC20s, or the way that we all use our wallet addresses for multiple different apps and multiple different fields, but it's the same kind of concept of a login with a wallet address. This means that you can contribute to a multitude of platforms, your research hub, your social media, your internal note-taking devices, whatever. And as you're contributing these pieces of content, which might eventually be aggregated by AI, they can actually be retroactively rewarded. And this is a really powerful mechanism for people to actually contribute to the collective AI growth, but actually receive some of the benefits of those AI models that do then grow, rather than it being just captured by the sort of singular entity, for example, OpenAI, which captures all the gains of their models. The data that it's actually used upon is public data. It's data belonging to everybody else, produced by everybody else. So one thing that Web3 can do is it can put ownership on that data that you produced, can timestamp it or mark it with a wallet address, which creates a trail of provenance on the blockchain for you to then be retroactively rewarded for those AI creations.
Awesome to hear the complete research flow from the creator to the utilizer of the research in a very beautiful way that you have explained. Thank you, Joshua. Actually, congratulate Mirza that you have recently, released your next version on the GOSH perspective, and you have a very great roadmap in terms of the AI implementation as part of the Web3 world. I wanted to understand why the decentralization of the AI is so important. If you can just give your thought on that, would be helpful. Mirza, please, over to you.
Yes, sure. Well, we spoke about marketplaces here. The most efficient marketplace, though, is stealing. Right? You don't have any constraints. You just take someone else's data and use it. And that's exactly what is happening right now. And so why it works, actually? It works because it's the most efficient way. You just take it, right? And that's if you have a centralized model, centralized entity, centralized control, that's what you do, right? Because you can. Now, there's another aspect of that. And we're talking about security with all of that. We talk a lot about security of the AI model training, whatever outcome. But as we see on and that's our kind of thought process. We see last 9 months, the explosion of the open source models and also of the efficiency of these models. So it is quite clear that within a very limited amount of time, I would say a year, maybe 2 years, we will see very capable large language model on par with GPT-4, GPT-5, whatever, running on a simple notebook of every child in every school on the planet. Now, what are you going to do about that? And so it's not only that we have some kind of negativity against centralization and against stealing. Yes, we do. But it's also another aspect that there is simply, it cannot be contained. It will not be contained. And it shouldn't be contained. And because this is what we call progress. So of course, there are many people which sometimes forget taking their pills, which are against this kind of progress, right? And they say, okay, the AI will kill us all, and you can read Eliezer Yudkowsky before you go to sleep every day, so you will have some nightmares. But we believe that actually to decentralize all that, right? Not only to open source all that, but as Don rightly put out, like there is a difference between federation, decentralization, centralization. All of that is different things, right? We're talking about decentralization, not federation. It's not enough. Like we need to really decentralize. So what we can do to decentralize it, and does that necessarily mean that everyone should immediately go without their pants on the street? Like that the researcher need to go and immediately submit all that he's doing to the blockchain tomorrow, and okay, give some wallet if someone wants to contribute to him or her, that's okay. No, I don't think so. And what I want to say, another aspect of this is that decentralization doesn't mean necessarily completely to open your work in every stage. It doesn't mean that. And for example, one of our launch partners, Eternity Cloud, just launched on the mainnet. And the Eternity Cloud is basically a trusted execution environment. It's like a privacy execution environment, but completely decentralized. So what we are going to do with Eternity Cloud in terms of AI training is that every researcher will be able to go to the Eternity Cloud marketplace, buy some trusted execution environment time, and submit their model in a completely decentralized way, train it a completely decentralized way, work on the data set in a completely decentralized way, but yet without exposing that data on this stage of the research to the whole world. What is important, of course, that once it's done, once the research is done, then how we run the model. Okay? And then that's, again, as we said before, there is two extreme views. One is, okay, we will control everything. We will run it on our servers. We will not let anyone access that, and we will control it completely. And another one, which will, eat the first one for breakfast sooner or later, is that if you don't open your model, someone else will. and someone else will run it on their notebook and whatnot. So to have complete access to the model, to the data, to the training loop, to everything is important for the same reason open source has this open security model where the fact that you open your source code doesn't necessarily mean it is less secure. It's actually mean the opposite. Simply because everyone can go and look and also create some kind of tooling around that to go and search for some vulnerabilities or whatnot and find them and point them out. And so if we have, and I'll just, the last thing is an example of how you could run, like if you need a GPU to run a model, for example, a large GPU to run something, you can say, like, we are not going to run this model unless it has a community open source, like open decentralized way approval that this model is kind of good to go on this GPU. Okay, so we're thinking in that lines. I don't know if that will hold, but that's the way I've thought.
Awesome to hear this. So taking that same conversation forward, so Don is working on specifically on the privacy specific items. I want to understand his view on, if you are talking about this decentralized AI network, and how can we ensure, it is fair and transparent, and the important thing is, how we can have the accountability of the AI decision-making process. Probably if you can share your thought, Don, from what Mitja has provided. I think he has given the context, and if you can just take that forward, that would.
Or I'll try and be brief too, because I think we're running out of time. So I don't think it's up to us. I think the AIs are going to choose to go this route. So what we need to do is provide the foundational elements that they can transact and interoperate through. But in my mind, I look at a scenario where, you look out at this time horizon, 5 years, whatever the hell it is. You got a handful of organizations that control all of this, or you have, this emergent explosion of AI agents. And what's more likely, I do think the universe proves this out time and time again. We move towards entropy, so there will be more of these agents, and they are going to want to not have to deal with piracy, like Mitja said. And so the natural evolution for this seems, from our perspective, on the Nevermind side, is at the core of all of this is again, these two elements of attribution. So anything that a model is contributing to an ecosystem must be properly attributed, but also needs to understand that what is being consumed within these ecosystems, the context that Josh discussed, should also have attribution. And that extends out to the consent side. Just to kind of provide a corollary to, and somewhat dispute Mitja's argument that piracy is the easiest way to go. I think the music and entertainment space prove that somewhat, to be somewhat of a fallacy. Spotify, Netflix, etc., make it easier to consume because of the attribution that actually exists in the consent mechanisms that are baked in. I don't have to worry that, what I'm downloading off of Pirate Bay is either going to be the full asset that I'm trying to download, or that it's not going to, have a bunch of landmine viruses baked into it. I know what I'm getting is what I'm getting because of elements of attribution and consent. So I think, just to answer your question, Prasanna, it's those two things that are going to drive us forward, or drive these systems forward, but it's not going to be driven by us. It's going to be at the behest of these agents that are emerging. They will require it. Otherwise, they won't want to contribute anything. They don't want to deal with piracy.
Awesome. So I would like to open up for questions. I'm not sure how long we have got time. Is there any questions from the audience? Be happy to take the time.
We have a good 5 minutes for 1 or 2
Awesome.
questions, if you keep it within 5 minutes. I think Yvonne or somebody.
Yeah, so we can post a hopefully quick question. Can synthetic data be used to address data privacy concerns or mitigate biases in AI algorithm?
So who would like to take up the question? Specific to synthetic data.
Well, in the end, you will still need the real data to train the model. The synthetic data, you can debug it, but you can't train it on synthetic data.
I mean, you can. It depends on it. So my question would be, what's private here? Is the synthetic data set also private? But the reality is, and so the way I look at this is, if one organization or entity or individual or AI can clone a data set, so can the next one. So it becomes a question of how relevant is it to preserve the privacy of something that can be easily generated through generative AI.
Yeah, I think
so,
that the where the data comes from or the use of that data itself is the sort of primary answer here when it comes to synthetic data. You know, there's a couple of projects working with us. One called Humanity. They're working on synthetic data sets to train AI models for determining like the best way to behave for longevity or the longness of life. And so they're utilizing like essentially derivatives of real life medical data sets about people's, you know, how their bodies are functioning and under certain conditions. And then they're creating synthetic data sets off those so it's privacy preserving and using those synthetic data sets to train the models. This is something that I think is going to scale. And from what I understand from Humanity, it's something that is like they're pushing as this is how you should be training AI models because it maintains that privacy, but it also is essentially like 99.9% similar in terms of its results. Yes, debugging is probably its primary use case now, but I assume it gets better. One thing that we'd like to see, and one of the frameworks that we're looking at building into with DeSci World is that we'd like to see if you are able to correctly sort of prove the provenance of these attributions, prove the provenance of these context attributions, you could essentially assign a value to those data sets. And if it's shown, if it can be proven that these data sets or these contexts or these attributions are produced by human inputs and then verified as a human input, then you could essentially assign more value to these inputs because they're produced by human data. It's human produced data sets. When it comes to, again, healthcare, there's some issues here with privacy. But you can start to see how the way that you categorize these contributions, especially when you can sort of mark them with a Web3 identity, it can be anonymized if you wish, but it can also be attached to a real world persona. And then you can actually start to grade the quality of these data sets or these contributions. And you could do so according to whether or not it's done from a real life person or whether or not it's a synthetic data set. And that could play again into its incentives, into how the AI models are rewarding the contributions. If it's a real world data set or if it's a synthetic data set, it could be rewarded differently. And this is one way to sort of handle this issue.
Just to add to that, again, going back on like the creation of synthetic data, again, if one organization can create it, you should assume that another organization can create it. So we get into a scenario here where what is actually valuable? The synthetic data is, to answer the question, can it preserve privacy? Yes, I think that's demonstrable at this point. The issue becomes these AIs will then all be trained on the same data set. So how valuable is any one AI against another? And the fact of the matter is these AIs will be optimized for relevance. And so they'll want to compete with one another. So really I think the motivation here is identifying unique, distinct, or discrete context. going back to the marketplace play, that's also the best type of ecosystem to compete for those types of assets.
Yeah, I think also I think maybe it's important also to mention what is synthetic data, because I think I was talking about different synthetic data than Joshua and Don were talking about. For me, synthetic data is a data which is seems to be the real data, but it's not. If you have created a synthetic data set, which is a real data set, which means that it's valuable data set. For example, you kind of created a programming, which is a data set, which is real programs which executes and run and everything is fine with them, then how synthetic is that data? So of course, that synthetic data set is just a normal data set in that respect. And of course, you can use it to train the models and all, but not. But when you talk about synthetic data sets, which is kind of presumed to be, it's like real, but it's not, then it's a different story.
Yeah, I think this distinction is something that's starting to blur in the sense that you can have in the context of healthcare, in this example, you could have the real healthcare data, and then you run some kind of script on it, and it changes it, it anonymizes it essentially, just like in a sense. That would not be synthetic data, but then you'd have the synthetic data, which is actually created by just an algorithm, which is programmed to determine what healthcare data might look like, and then pretends that it's a living being and produces that data. Those both, as far as I'm aware, both are capable of being used to train AI in this context. And I think to sort of go back to Don's point, the market hypothesis here does play out quite efficiently. I think I'm not a big proponent of the market hypothesis and the efficient market hypothesis in general. I think it doesn't really play out in our current world, but this is an opportunity for it to play out. And a good way to think about the synthetic to organic data is just like when you're shopping, people like to purchase organic produce because they feel like to be higher quality. It's probably smaller, it's probably less complex, it's probably less beautiful to look at, and more expensive. But because it's organic or produced by verified human backers, it can be more useful. And it's when you start to try and train these AI models with, as Don said, those uniqueness of data and those AI models that have the nuances or what seems to be intelligence that maybe those trained on large data sets of anonymized data or synthetic data will not possess that kind of initiative that maybe these other or more organically trained ones may do.
So on that note, my takeaway is that you all just motivated us to have a dedicated session on the definition of synthetic data versus other data. So thank you very much. We are a little bit over time. This was a very exciting conversation and panel to watch. So thank you very much for all the panelists, and thank you very much, Prasanna. And we will welcome you back, obviously, to the stage at the end of the day when we officially announce the WOW DAO. So, gentlemen, thank you very much.